So today we have an exciting talk with three of the recent graduates of the MFA in Photography at Ulster University, discussing their work with Ken Grant. And Ken is the program head there. So got to kind of interact with everybody while they made their work. So it should be an exciting conversation about the last 2 years. So we're going to do just a quick 5 to 8 minute introduction on each artist's work, and then begin the conversation with Ken and the artists. And afterwards, we'll take some Q&A from the audience if you have any questions. So we have Niall, Ruddy, Roula, Patra, and Gavin Martin with us tonight, and we will start hearing from them in that order. So I'll turn it over to you, Niall.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. And thanks Mark and everybody at Belfast Exposed for your support and for organizing everything. So I'm just gonna show, I'm just gonna do a run through a slightly extended version of the images that I prepared for the exhibition, A Lightness of Touch. So can everybody see this okay? Yeah. Yep. Okay, yes. Perfect. Okay, so just to introduce myself, my name's Niall Ruddy, and I'm originally from Newry in Northern Ireland. I grew up there throughout the 80s and 90s before moving to the south of Ireland around the early 2000s. And after living there for about 5 or 6 years, I moved to South Korea. I've been living in South Korea for almost a decade now. And obviously been doing the MFA at the University of Ulster for the last 2 years through the distance learning. So the project that I'm introducing is titled He Made a Fortress from His House. And just to give you a bit of context for the project, the Korean War started in 1950. It lasted until 1953. It ended in armistice rather than an actual cessation of conflict. And so since then, I'm sure a lot of people will be aware, the peninsula of Korea has been divided into the north and the south. So the project that I began whenever I started the MFA was actually about the tension between the traditional and modern, but through conversation and through actually going out and making work, I started to realize that it wasn't just the tension between the traditional and modern in Korea that was important to me on a personal level. It was also the tension between different areas of society, and that was largely influenced by the Korean War, by conflict and division. So whenever I was approaching the project, I was obviously looking at a lot of Korean photographers. Some of the photographers here, Park Jong-woo, Oh Hyung-gun, and Park Eria, they made work about conflict, how it's influenced society in the present, but they've looked at it from an insider's perspective, being Korean. Korea is a largely homogenous country. I am a 6 foot tall, bald Irishman, and I stick out quite a lot. So there wasn't a question of me looking at it from an insider's perspective. So the unique perspective that I decided to take was to look at it from an outsider's perspective, but more specifically an outsider from Northern Ireland. One of the key influences, speaking of outsiders, was Paul Graham's work, Troubled Land, which he made about Northern Ireland. Paul Graham's an English photographer, and he went into the country and began to make work, but he didn't want to make work that was similar to what everybody else was making, which was very violent and in your face. So he started to make work like this. The first time I saw this image, it took me right back to my childhood growing up in South Armagh. The almost imperceptible helicopter in the left, to the left of the image, reminded me of the fact whenever I was a child, these Chinook helicopters would be flying over my house on a very regular basis. We were right beside a helicopter base, and how that filled me with fear and anxiety, but also excitement. So I wanted to emulate this somewhat. I was also influenced by Michael Schmidt and his work, Waffenruhe, which was about the division of Berlin. So this was one of the first images that I came to whenever I had decided to sort of focus on conflict. And it sort of sums up a lot about what the project ultimately came to be about. It is a typically sort of rugged scene in the northeast of the country in a province called Gangwon-do, which would be fairly normal if it weren't for the barbed wire fence that cuts right down the middle of the image. These fences were built in the 1970s whenever North Korean insurgents tried to invade via this coast, and they still exist to this day. I started to visit this province and I started to make a lot more images. And what came about was, I'm going to show an extended sort of, I'm ultimately aiming to try and make a book out of the project. And so I'm going to run through a selection of some of the images. So the ideas that I'm working with, I'm trying to look at the subtle and the not so subtle influences of conflict on the society. I wanted to show what it's like to live in Korea at the moment, where, similar to Northern Ireland, the troubles weren't necessarily something that you actively talked about in your day-to-day life, but it was something that was always there. It was on the news, it influenced politics, it influenced where you lived, it influenced your family, your education, and that is similar to what we see in South Korea. I wanted to highlight the fact that everything is influenced from the obvious things, such as the topography, the landscape, but the not so obvious things, such as the psychology of people, you know, whether people have experienced trauma directly from the war, and how that sort of has become a generational trauma and continued to the present day. One of the key motifs in the work is the camouflage, which I'm using as a sort of indication of the fact that the citizenry are almost there as a standing army. Lots and lots of people wear camouflage on a daily basis. And in fact, the male population, every single male in the country has to serve a mandatory 19 months in the armed forces in usually their 20s. How that influences gender in the country is a huge thing. You know, the military modernism that exists in the country influences politics. It influences music and film, architecture, school curriculum. The project for me works or is intended to work on 3 levels. It helps me to understand Korea, and I hope that it helps other people to understand Korea too, to sort of see a little bit more of what daily life is like. I think a lot of people will be aware of the tensions with North Korea, but maybe they won't be aware of a lot of other things about South Korea. It helps me to understand conflict and division also, and therefore it helps me to understand my own personal history, which of course was defined by conflict in Northern Ireland. So that is a brief introduction to my project. Thank you everyone for listening, and I look forward to any questions you have afterwards.
Thank you, Niall. We will move on to Roula now for her introduction.
Okay, give me a second to share my screen. Okay. Hello, thank you so much for coming today. I'm Roula Patra. I came from Greece. I'm a forensic photographer and I'm a postgraduate student of MFA in photography at Ulster University. Today I'm going to present you my work entitled The Duo Project. It manifests that biology does not determine relationships, behaviors, or gender identities. It is a start of everything, but not the final destination. The Duo Project is a work emerging from the experience of being a woman or being born a woman within social frames like traditional biological family, strictly defined by sociocultural conventions. Moving from a more socio-political context, the DUO project provides a new basis for female relationships, behaviors, and lives, contributing to the elimination of oppressive situations experienced by women. It is one piece of work in two parts, so I'm going to show you these parts. The first one is entitled The Past We Never Had. It conveys our unshared and constructed past that my stepdaughter and I we never had, and we digitally created through our imagination by combining archival, photographic and video material. And I managed I managed to collect all these years. It consists of 19 photos and one video, which follow. Sorry, I have a problem with, okay. The second part is entitled A Life Together. It conveys our life together and the affiliation that we have managed to build within our constructed, not biologically linked family frame, highlighting the importance of love and oneness, as well as exploring female identity. In this part, combine photography, performance, and video with collaboration, experimentation, dual roles, and time dominating, as well as we use objects like mirrors, wigs, and photos as our tools of exploration. The DUO project, as a performative, a metaphotographic, multimedia and multi-layered artwork, is an ongoing project and an open question and continual collaboration. And it prophesizes a promising future for me and my stepdaughter. We aim to metamorphose our personal experience of our relationship into an experience of art with surrealism and womanhood in the foreground. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for listening to me. I give my order to Martin Gav. Thank you.
Roula, thank you so much. We'll move on to Gavin for his short introduction, and then we're passing it on to Ken to discuss.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for that, Roula and Niall. Okay, I'm just going to share my my screen. So my work started. Actually, no, that's not the one that I wanted to share. Which one is it? This one here. So my work started as a. Sorry, where is it? I don't know if that's sharing the right one.
Okay, we're not seeing anything.
You're not seeing anything?
Oh, there it goes. There it goes.
Are you seeing this? The one with the two pictures, one on top of the other?
Two and then the bathroom.
Yeah. So mine started around the same time, like a couple of years ago. I started doing my own sort of course of counseling and therapy for just generally, life problems and whatnot. And I was surprised to see how much that the course actually just dovetailed in with my own sort of therapy, and it really complemented it. And my concept sort of grew out of my own sort of healing. And in the beginning of my journey, it was a lot of exploration into childhood memory, into trauma, into sort of specific events that I could draw from. And as you can see, it's quite dark, quite moody, quite cinematic. And I always had that sort of visual in my head that I wanted to achieve, because maybe from having worked in the advertising industry, I sort of wanted to explore a number of themes, and then sort of make a collaboration of all of these themes to sort of form some work. We're just going to share another screen now. This one here. Okay, is that sharing the one with me sitting in the chair in the yard?
Yep,
yeah,
all good.
So I wanted to sort of go through all of these as a sort of as a healing journey, and I thought that I really wanted to do a project that was based on self-portraiture, because it's just sort of the thing that I had in my head was that it was all supposed to be about me sorting myself out and healing myself, but really, as the project went on, I wanted to move it on to sort of be a more of a communications and behavioral sort of analysis, and really show people that not sort of such a personal account. I wanted it to be more of a general account that could provide people a sort of a sense of something that they could empathize with. The sort of the staged approach ties in with the advertising background as well, and I really always liked that as an aesthetic, because I use the advertising in my practice to symbolize this sort of this perfect idealistic sort of view of things, and really to aim for these, and in a sense is cinematic as well, because of the staging, and also a bit of a history in on stage myself. So I knew I wanted it to be a layered approach. I wanted it to be structured and staged, because I wanted it to be, I wanted every picture to have a sort of an enormous amount of detail, and then I'll share my the final sort of approach. So out of that came the work that you saw in the gallery. This image, again coming from memory, it was sort of like the types of the types of places that I would have I would have sort of frequented as a child, sort of, you know, these playgrounds. I chose to sort of base it around Cave Hill because as I sort of delved deeper into behavioral issues and my own therapy, I sort of started to learn that it's very important to kind of ground yourself in order to develop trust and relationships properly, which I was struggling with because of experiences as a child. You need to be able to ground yourself and have that sort of base. And so I sort of went out to try and find these areas of sort of damaged beauty, I guess, or aesthetic views on trauma, but with this sort of basing it around Cave Hill to kind of give it a sense of being able to ground. And then I sort of I changed my practice slightly to try and sort of capture as much detail as possible. And you know, when I was looking at the artists and photographers that influenced me, I looked at the likes of Jeff Wall and a lot of the people who I liked or who I was influenced by, Gregory Crewdson. They used sort of a large format or medium format approach in terms of their sensor size, and I really like that because of the amount of detail that it could capture in an image. But when I couldn't do that, when I couldn't get hold of a camera for that sort of purpose, I just used my SLR or my Canon, and I sort of stitched together these multiple layers of panorama. So the image, like you see here, is kind of made up of like 6 to 10 images, all shot in multiple layers of panorama stacked on top. And because I was using quite a wide aperture, there's the focal range or the focal length varies in different parts of the picture. So I don't know if you can make it out, but it just started to kind of it started to create this depth to the image, and almost like an ability to step into the picture. And sorry, they're quite large images, so they take a little bit to load. But yeah, so it came to sort of present this strange depth, almost as if you're in the image, sort of looking around the image, and that you could sort of in a way that represented the kind of the sort of the flaws in our own memory, and especially in traumatic incidents. You can remember bits, and you can remember sort of little bits of detail, but there's a lot of it that's quite hazy. And so that sort of felt like it was a nice natural progression for my own style and my practice as well. And yeah, and then with the Lightbox, it was all about using the sort of the tenets of the advertising trade to kind of, you know, to really grab people's attention as a lot of the problems with trauma that's caused in these you know, childhood experiences resulting in arrested development. It's how do you communicate effectively? And so so I took sort of strands from the advertising world, my own memory and my photographic practice as a commercial photographer, and sort of tried to merge it all together. And this is what I came up with. And really the question that kept on coming up was, how do you accurately visualize a trauma? With the likes of a wartime photographer can visualize trauma quite effectively because it's happening, it's present. But if it's past trauma, how do you accurately do that? And the way it felt most effectively portrayed trauma to me was when I was doing something that actually involved it being difficult to make the picture. So the harder the picture was, or say if I was on a site and the police were called to the site, I felt like that was a great picture. You know, I was really happy with that because it was like yeah, I've done something that kind of pushed me a little bit further. It was a bit traumatic in the actual taking of the photograph, and the creation then felt it kind of it was an accurate sort of facsimile of it. So yeah, that's how it came to be. So I'm sure that's enough talking for now. So here we go. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Gavin. That's lovely.
Probs.
Thank you guys for those introductions. I will hand it over to Ken to moderate the rest of the discussion about the work. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks everyone for the introductions. It's kind of strange going back over them in such short, concise blocks of time, because there's been 2 years of conversations, and in some ways you're almost going back to the start. You know, there's something that's, I suppose, an imperative. There's an idea, or there's a need. It's fascinating listening to Gavin talk a little bit about the fact that there's a dovetailing between other things that are going on in life and photography, and making the work and making those connections. And I suppose it made me think that a lot of people come back to do a master's because they've got other lives, or they've had other lives, or other lives have been a big, I suppose, part of a journey which is very different to where they are now. And this is a moment, not necessarily to collapse into it, but to maybe almost affirm that this is the time when we really need to talk about things, or figure things out, and make a piece of work that's meaningful for once.
I think, Ken, what I found from the course was that it was really, it was the first sort of course that I had done that was really, I could see from the start that I was only going to benefit from the course if I sort of was fully committed to the self-exploration and self-discipline part of it. I don't think you could go on to it and sort of expect to be, you know, it's like there was guidance. It was great, but I had to sort of bring the I don't know, the destination, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about Niall's pictures. If Niall's with us.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And thanks for being with us at 2:30 in the morning over in Busan. But what I was conscious of was, I suppose, your rationale and your reflection on the experience that you've had, but also I suppose, a moment when certain fuses tripped, when you started to realize that there's some very clear connection between maybe some of the situations you were experiencing, or some of the environment that you're moving through here and now in Busan, and things back home. I suppose it's a selfish question, really, because I'm always asking it and thinking about, as somebody who's traveled around a lot, I don't always make work about the place I'm in. But do you see Ireland a little bit more clearly from a distance? Is that something that's occurred to you now?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of people that end up, I mean, I'm part of an expat community here, and a lot of the people are American. There's a lot of South African people here, because the two main industries that people go into whenever they're working here is engineering and English teaching. So I was here as an English teacher. I still do part-time English teaching. And being part of the expat community, you see people getting a lot more sort of nationalistic, I would say. You know, I came over here, and I would say that part of my motivation was to get away from Ireland, really. Not because I hated it or anything, but I had lived it and I wanted to experience something else. But coming over here, and especially now, I've been here for so long, I never expected to be here for 10 years. It's going to be 10 years this August. And I'm also simultaneously approaching my 40th. I'll be 40 in 2 years. And so you start to look back at your life, and you start to think about, you know, who you are, I think, whenever you're sort of getting older. And I hadn't thought about the fact that I was making this work to try and understand Ireland, or to try and understand Northern Ireland whenever I started. And I wasn't really thinking about trying to understand Korea either. But as I started to make the work, I started to recognize elements in South Korea that were completely the same as Ireland, Northern Ireland. And in some sense, actually, I feel that Northern Ireland maybe reached a point, let's say in the mid-90s, where people were just tired. They were sick of conflict. And I think now, whenever I go back home to Northern Ireland, it's amazing to talk to people and see people, and people are talking about mental health a lot more, because it's been a blight, particularly, it's, I think, the #1 killer of men between 18 and 45 or something like that. And people are starting to talk about that. And I think South Korea has a little bit further to go in that sense, because there isn't as active conflict as there would have been in Northern Ireland. I mean, you don't see bombs going off in the streets here or soldiers with guns in the streets necessarily, but definitely having the distance that I have and then returning back home once every couple of years, it's incredible to see how Ireland changes and how Northern Ireland changes and how it's changed so much since I was a child. And the perspective that I have from over here, I can almost measure, you see it and then you don't see it and you come back and see it again, and you can measure the difference, because it becomes so sudden to me because I haven't seen it before. Whereas people living there, maybe it's such a gradual progression that it's not as apparent, maybe.
I think, yeah. And I think one of the achievements, one of the great achievements in what you've done is, and you talked about it as a kind of separation, you're a tall 6-foot guy who's totally recognizable in the street, is to maybe figure out a way of coming to terms with things which may very easily be overlooked, and coming to terms with them photographically. I remember some of the early conversations, because your energy was incredible, still is, because you're making a lot of street photography and you're working through a place and trying to understand it. And the process was very fluid, and it was kind of recognizable in the way that a lot of, in the world that we're in now, which is so much wrapped around computers, street photography has almost organically become another phase of interest for a lot of photographers. And you were very much making work which had a lot of that fluency and that, I suppose, dexterity, but in a way that seemed to align it with street photography. Whereas what you've started to do is maybe, I suppose, slow things down a little bit, maybe seeing something of, you talk about the omnipresence of certain kinds of conditions, or the psychological condition that seems to be prevalent the more you spend time moving through that city, in terms of how people manage themselves, how people move through a place, how design is worked through, how architecture exists, how cities are developed and cities are built. So whilst I'm talking to you about South Korea, I could also be talking about Belfast, or I could talk about postmodern.
Also, Ken, just on that, is how normalizing it becomes to be around tension and conflict. And the pictures, Niall's pictures, really beautifully demonstrate that it's, to many people, it would be a bit outrageous to see some of the things that are there, but it becomes so normal. And I think Northern Ireland have done that. We've grown up in a society where it's completely normal for there to be a burnt out car in the middle of the road, smoking away. And it's like that, normalizing that sort of tension is, I think that's a big part of the sort of the identity of Northern Irish people. Certainly I feel it is with me, and I carry a lot of tension around with me anyway, but I think Niall catches it in a quite an understated way. But it's definitely there. It's obvious,
And you've each drawn upon the sensibility of that comes with the backgrounds that you've had, and both personal backgrounds and professional backgrounds. I'm thinking about Roula here, if I can bring Roula in a little bit more, because one of the things that has always interested me, and it's not something that's been discussed a lot, is day to day, Roula. You're a forensic photographer. You're looking at things in absolute magnificent detail, and you're making very clear observations and building records and making things apparent that maybe aren't always immediate. But on the other side of it, you've got a body of work, and you've got a life of work which is is on the one hand, and you said it very, very beautifully, it's about love, it's about having recreating or trying to articulate a relationship, the history of a relationship in a way that almost claims it back. But at the same time, I can see an absolute intensity of looking, and I can see in some of the spreads that we saw on the screen there, I can see pictures which are almost looking into your daughter-in-law, or almost trying to see something in absolute detail and trying to get close to something. Am I imagining that? Is that something I'm way off the mark? Or
no, I see it too. I see it too.
Mm.
The truth is that this relationship helped me very much to understand many things about me and about my stepdaughter. And the fact that here in Greece, things about family, and especially traditional family, it's very weird and very narrowed. For example, I'm a divorced woman with no kids, so it isn't proper or it is difficult to accept that a woman can help to grow up a girl that I have no biological connection with her. So I would like to always to express my experience, and photography and helped me very much to do that. And as Fotini grows up, I want to make her a part of it. I want to help in all this process. So from now on, we decide together how this project will go, which is the future of this project, which is ongoing, as I said already. But it helped me very much to understand first my needs, because this relationship does not start from my need to be a mother. It is something else. It is something personal. When I see her sonogram, I feel something strong, and I want to share with the people these feelings, because I think that, as I told, biology can start everything, but the final destination, we decide which is the final destination. So I think that all this process helped me a lot as a person, firstly.
Yeah, and you mentioned you describe it really well when you talk about deciding on these things together and working on these things together. And it's never more apparent than seeing the video in the gallery and seeing two very distinct personalities, very different ages, negotiating the same, working with the same task, doing the same job, but doing it in very different ways. But at the end, reaching absolute togetherness in a way that I don't think it could be choreographed any better. It just has that kind of a process right the way through: independence, integrity, individual integrity, and then together. Incredibly beautiful. How does collaboration work? Is it conversations? Is it sharing the process? Is it ideas developing together? Because I'll say why, because I think it seems like that kind of honesty is there, and that kind of trust and collaboration is really clear. But also visually, they're incredibly striking. And I'm a selfish photographer. There's just one of me, and I just want to make my pictures, and I can't imagine how fulfilling it is. It must be incredible to work together on something and still have that kind of outcome.
As I said, this project, I want to be something that comes from a collaboration. So me and Fotini, we are in the whole process co-artists. Yeah. I want to know her opinion and her view, and she also wants the same. So when we decide to make this video, we decided to do it and experiment on it. So we have this this final video, we perform on the camera. She takes my video and I take her video, and after that I combine it through a software for video editing, and I split it into I split screen in order to have both of us in the screen. But the truth is that I don't. The fact that we synchronize, it is something that comes later. It is not in our mind because the two videos has a different duration. Mm. But finally, I think that the final video is quite good.
It's more than quite good. I think it's incredible. Incredible. I think installation is something that seems to have happened really quite organically, you know. So and part of you working in Greece, making lots of work, and in some ways that the journey over the last 2 years is, for me, looking at your work develop, has been about trying to come to terms with the thing that's at the center of it all the time, and because there's so many different ways it could move off up into different emphases, or with different kinds of questions aligned to it. But the idea of oneness, or the idea of this very particular, almost forensic I'm going to say it again, forensic examination of a connection or of a relationship is quite incredibly built just around those ideas again and again, and that keeps it focused. So I guess going into the gallery and going into the gallery for Roula, it seemed like there was always a sense, and I remember some of your early designs where you designed gallery spaces and introduced through SketchUp and different processes ways in which the work needed to be seen. But I want to go back to Gavin for a second, because I think that's something that was really remarkable when I first walked into the space and saw the way that you'd installed the light box. And Gavin, you talked a bit about the light box, and you talked about the advertising, the centrality of advertising in the work and the history of advertising in the work. And in a way, you're also, you know, for 5 minutes, that's a really great, almost like a Pechacucci, where you gave us Gregory Croots, and you gave us all these different ways into the work. But there's also something which I think now is completely changed, because the work has
massively,
it has absolute nuance in a way that it's almost like there's a process that's been refined, and you've worked through. It's almost like you worked through. I remember seeing Rembrandt's sketches years and years ago in a show, and then there was a show of Rembrandt's assistants and studio workers, and some of the young really quite gifted apprentices just getting going, and you could see that they were emulating, or they were taking on some of the styles and some of the mannerisms of what they were being led by. But then there's a point where it just kind of cuts off, and people start to build their own sense. And I thought what you've given us there, in terms, you've worked with the language of advertising, you've worked with the seduction of advertising, if that's not too strong a word. You've worked with the insistence of advertising, but the work itself, the pictures themselves, have a completely different level of refinement from those, really, which I really always enjoyed, those early pictures that you made with.
Yeah, well, I mean, all through my life, I've not to go too deep, but I've always had a kind of a sense that I'd had no idea what to do, you know, but I had ability, but not really any clue what it would result in. And so I suppose looking back on it now, and it happened in the same way with the photography, and the realization of the concept was that I've been picking up little sort of fragments of bits and pieces, almost like, I don't know whether it's in reverse order, that I've just been finding bits and pieces and then piecing it together, or just picking up things and making something from, you know, organically. Whether it was broken to begin with or it's been made from the start, I don't know. But either way, I mean, maybe in both senses it works. So, you know, the advertising, I did that for a reason. I did that because it gave me communication skills that I didn't necessarily have before, and always felt like I wasn't really being understood with a lot of my language and my verbal skills, even though I was doing some writing in that sense. But it makes me think a lot of the problems with the education system for people who aren't good verbal communicators. And you know, if you have a visual brain, that communication is completely different. And it's why I like behavioral psychology. It's why I like the power of film. It's why I like graphic novels, because, you know, memories are remembered in visceral detail beyond language. You know, you don't remember a memory as a paragraph on a page. You remember it with, you know, with smells, with feelings, and with music and all sorts of things. So really, I knew that through the course and through the development of the concept, I was picking up bits of ideas. And early on, you said to me that you know, some of the tableaus that I had created were great, but why don't I try actually building something with those? And that was a perfect parody of the action that I needed to take to get to the stage that I got to. And realistically, it was a breakthrough when I arrived on that final sort of series of pictures, because I was literally at the point of being broken with the whole thing. I thought, I've got nothing. I'm not going to be able to show, you know, in Belfast Exposed, and that's, you know, it's come to nothing. But then it was, I was looking at it upside down, and it was everything that I'd started out doing had just kind of ended up in one place, and it, you know, and all of a sudden everything kind of made sense in the end. So it was really, you know, I started off the course trying to refine my style and develop a concept, and I did both of those things. And I you know, as hard as it was, and with COVID, it was you know, it was an added hurdle. But like I've said to some of the people who I was talking about, the fine art printing and whatnot, the harder it is to make my pictures, the better, the more gratification I get from it. So it's like, yeah, bring it on. You know, the more shit that I can actually go through to actually make a picture, brilliant. You know, which is really it's you know, I'm bulletproof now. If I just go with that attitude, I'm bulletproof. You know.
Well, you know, we never got near talking about COVID as a group, did we?
No.
And it's almost the gift that keeps on giving. And I think from my perspective, a lot of the intensity that you often see with people, because you're a very generous sense saying about you couldn't quite, you thought you might have nothing. In a way, you know, that's kind of getting close to where it actually is and where things are, because if you know what to do and you just roll them out, then you become a kind of craft maker, and you just set up a stall in St. George's Market and sell things, but don't really care about them or think about them. Yeah. If it's something a little bit more tricky, more challenging, then you've got a battle which is probably worth fighting. You've got something which, as we started off talking about, there's certain things you can't ignore, and you have to figure out ways of
fitting them in around you,
whilst not completely feeling broken or being and that can refine. And part of the bedrock is to have a sense of the different territories and a sense of the nourishment that can come from saying, okay, I'm going to look into some behavioral therapy, or I'm going to come into this, start to look, and there's a research that becomes really quite nourishing and helping the process along as it does.
And it's not ending, you know. It's only a beginning to a new understanding of things. It's not like, you know, like, oh, that was that, so I've finished with that now. That I will use the skills that I have now in everything that I do, probably, because it's kind of, it makes sense now to that the reason why I've developed certain skills, you know. So but the way that you know, I arrived at the final sort of presentation of it, you know, it was really influenced by the garishness of advertising, and you know, it's unashamed, you know, and it'll just it needs to take a risk for it to be effective, and you know, the likes of Philip Lorca de Corsia, you know, and Hans Arsman, and you know, that sort of looking at something that's a little bit twisted, but looking at it in a very sort of beautiful, aesthetically, you know, commercially viable way, in that sense, a very polished, perfectionistic, you know, approach, and yeah, that seemed to fit really well with what.
Well, yeah, for people who haven't, because I know not everyone's maybe watching this has been able to get to Belfast, but it's on until, I think, is it 17th of July, but just sort of, Mark can correct me in a second if I'm wrong on that date. But the idea of going into a space, I thought it was, without exaggeration, I thought it was one of the most interesting and most diverse series of responses to things that are really quite close to home for everyone, you know, in so many different.
Very honest as well. I mean, really, really honest.
I was going to suggest, I think you're, just for people who haven't seen it, you've got a very large light box. And I remember the conversation when we were in Belfast a couple of weeks ago, where you were talking about maybe, and again, it was an echo of a certain kind of advertising concept where the spectacle is on a roll, or you're continually changing something, or you're working with the attention span of a public, and it got me thinking. I think the show's incredible. I think that we're very lucky to have that relationship with BX in the way we have. One thing I'm thinking about, as things do start to grow, and you take this as a starting point to think about, you know, a career as it moves forward. Are you thinking about where that work actually could exist as a finished piece, or as finished pieces? When I see your pictures, and certainly when I see your picture of an advertising hoarding, which I think is almost like a double bluff, I'm thinking is in the way that I think about some of the great innovators who've worked with the language of the city, people like Jenny Holzer with their digital installations that weave round, and instead of telling you what the NASDAQ figures are, it's actually telling you something a little bit more about how the world needs to tick. I'm just wondering if there's certain kinds of thoughts down the line that have started to occur in terms of where the work might exist for you, where it might be installed. For me, or for any of us? For you. Well, I'm going to go to Niall and Roula again.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you know, when I think of it because you got to think as a fine art photographer, you got to think of it from a commercial point of view as well, and public appeal, and especially in a very flooded, visually saturated world that we live in. You know, there's images, signs, lights, you know, messages everywhere. And anytime I was given an advertising brief, it was always you know, at the back of your mind, it's always like, okay, well, what can I do that can be a little bit more risky and a little bit more, you know, give you a little peg, like gluing like one of my early sort of advertising tutors was, he had worked in the industry in the 80s, and he was advertising Araldite or something like that, and they actually stuck a car onto a billboard. And it's just like, you know, sometimes you just sometimes you need to just blow away conventional thinking and just be like, yeah, well, you know, if it, you know, I want to try something that is, I mean, it had been done before, but it kind of made sense in my concept as well. And that's the thing that I had to stick with. But at the same time, I wanted to do something that took the best features of what I'd learned and used them in a way that could promote a message. And ultimately, it was about, you know, it was trying to sort of be a message about healing and recovery and sort of the impact on human behavior of you know, of that. But doubtless a lot of that gets lost, but you know, to some it'll be you know, that's the thing that's important, is that you got to keep I wanted to keep the message from being lost on the medium, you know.
I think for all of us, you know, it's you're working through something, and there's a certain point where you're completely snowblind. You've done something, you know there's something there, and then where do you go next, and how do you take it on, and when does it feel consolidated, when does it feel complete? What makes a series? You know, I'm wondering with Roula, if it sounds like there's a relationship that's going to develop over a long spell in terms of making the work, whilst other things are going on. There's something to come back to. You know, with your work, Gavin, I was looking at it and I was thinking, you know, this work could exist in the locations or in the landscape, not my word, but one we always end up using, that almost was responsible for the starting point of the conversation, you know, almost reclaiming the land, if you like, or reclaiming a childhood, or reclaiming a history, or reclaiming. So I think there's really exciting things, and I guess everyone's consolidating things in different ways. I'm just going to ask Niall a little about that, because he's making a series of pictures which I think have maybe in the last year or so have really started to integrate, and they've moved away from those quieter environmental pictures, which are almost kind of razor cut by the way the beaches are segregated with barbed wire, or what the way that there's certain kind of observation posts that pop in, which we have as a real echo of the Paul Graham in all recent photography. But I'm just thinking, Niall, is the book going to be the final outcome of this, or is there another suspicion that you have about how it's going to exist?
I think the plans that I have for the future would really be sort of going back to my own sort of personal history. My mother worked in, she was a manager of a volunteer organization, and she did a lot of work in the community. And again, another thing that comes up as I get older is that kind of idea of community, and sort of being here, I've had to build my own community outside of my family, because my family are 5,000 miles away. And community is very important. You know, I feel very close to the people that I'm here with. I'm very close with people back home. And I think the aim for this project would be to try and get some understanding, because I see the similarities with how, as I mentioned earlier on, the similarities with how things are in Northern Ireland, things are here. And because the two places are so different in sort of superficial ways, I think people wouldn't necessarily make that connection. But because of my experience, I have made that connection. And I sort of see it as being, you know, potentially in the future, something where I could maybe try to get a bit more communication between the two countries and build a community. Maybe what I've thought about is maybe trying to set up a situation where I could bring Northern Irish photographers, or, you know, photographers, I would say primarily, who are working in similar areas, and get them to come over here for a while. And I can you know, give them the inside information that they need to know about the place, and sort of see what kind of work they could make here, and vice versa, bring a Korean artist over to Northern Ireland, because I think there's a lot to be learned from both communities. And I think it's important to build those kind of connections.
That sounds fascinating.
I think like you know, what you were talking about earlier with Gav, I mean, what we're sort of looking at with the three different projects that we've talked about today, it's fundamentally what art is about. You know, we're trying to understand ourselves, we're trying to understand the world around us. And I think the big thing about art is you're raising questions, you're asking questions, you don't necessarily answer the questions. And that's why it can be so difficult, but that's also why it's so important. You know, the questions that we're asking ourselves and asking about the world around us, they're things that we need to know. And I mean, I think everybody that was doing the course had the same experience that Gav had. I certainly got to a point where I was looking at the work that I had in front of me, and I had the dark night of the soul and thought, you know, what is this? What have I got here? Where am I going? But that's, you know, the darkness before the dawn. You know, that's just before you make the breakthrough and you discover your voice and your authorship. And you know, you do that by community and making and communicating. So like a lot of the work that I've done, it wouldn't be the work that it is if it hadn't been for meeting the Korean photographers that I've met. And that was all just coincidence. That was me walking around on the street with a camera. And I've got a big Nikon D750, so it's not ideal for street photography, but it doesn't really matter anyway because everybody notices me wherever I go. But then people come over and ask me questions, you know, and then if I'm speaking Korean to them, they're suddenly thinking, okay, who's this guy who's just walking around taking pictures in this neighborhood that nobody, you know, I've never seen a foreigner here. And then you start talking and you build, like, you know, I met a few people who work in different galleries, and you know, that's how you start to understand in a real sense. And, you know, hopefully in the future, I'd love to be able to expand and, you know, build a community that crosses, you know, the borders, you know, in two countries that are divided. I mean, what a beautiful thing to bring them back together in another sense, you know.
And very valid, because there might be initiatives that don't exist in one part or another that could be shared or reciprocated or expanded upon, or I guess it's something that feels like a really interesting research foundation to think about those. But also I was really excited, you know, when you were presenting before, because really fluently you went straight through a whole number of areas that may relate something as a next subject or a next topic or a next area of focus, let's say, to be a bit more articulate about it, you know, because you started to talk about architecture, you started to talk about the school curriculum, which I know that you've had really close immersion into, you know. So there's I suppose there's different spaces that might offer a new sense of nourishment as you're moving forward in how you're working, whilst at the same time, you know, it's I'm always enthused when I see photographers quite often, or anybody working in anything that they choose to do themselves, because let's face it, in life it'd be very easy just not to do anything other than just keep on going, because that's sometimes tough enough. But then the fact that people are making work, responding to situations in a way that's incredibly meaningful, is something to really celebrate. And the way that you talk about, on one hand, working to facilitate certain kinds of things in terms of cooperations or collaborations, or even just, you know, I remember being in Seoul in the mid 1990s, and there's good conversations that can be shared across borders all the time, and you know that as probably far better than me. So to have that on one hand, and then also to think about how the practice that you're developing is just keeping on is a really interesting, whilst at the same time, you know, other kinds of things like the different kinds of work roles, it all kind of fits, and it can fit, and I think that's a really great trajectory. And I think it'd be lovely to find ways of keeping, you know, for everyone who's been working on the course, of course, but to figure out ways of supporting those things down the line and keeping those lines of conversation and cooperation going, because the more we can do of that, the better.
Yeah.
Thanks, Niall. Thank you. I'm just thinking about Roula with the last question. I know Roula's got to leave us at 7:15 to
I'm so sorry. I'm working. Yes.
Yeah, no
Okay,
trouble.
okay.
No trouble. Do you think that the work that you're making, just as a final question, do you think the work that you're making is where the next emphasis is for you, or are there other things that you're working on? Because you've got so many different ways of working, but this feels really, really close and feels like something that, in a way, you know, when you showed the concertina book, when you showed, it seems like we had a student who did the course and finished 2 years ago now, and he sent me his book, Mark. He sent me his book, Oceanfront Property, really beautifully made. Took about 2 years to do after finishing the course. And in terms of a gestation, it seems like that's the right amount of time, or the average amount of time to get something to happen. And it just feels like everything is at the point of, now it's about finishing, now it's about developing, now it's about having more time and less pressure to just really enjoy that process. Is that how you see things moving on now?
Yes, me and Fotini, we want to, because as I said, the project is ongoing, and we want to, we aim to a solo exhibition, and we want to keep an interactive option, and we want to put in the project the concept of live. So we are thinking to find, if we can find a space, a room. We decided we staged the whole work. This performance is going to be recorded, and the visitor can see all this process outside of the room, and when it's finished, they can go in and enjoy the exhibition. So we want to put in our work the live concept. It is a thought. We don't know, but on the exhibition will be also the photographs, the videos, and the book. We start from the artist statement and we end at the book, but we want an interactive character. And we keep that as a key element, because we always like to experiment, and everything is an experience. So we want to live it, and this is our plan.
Sounds incredible.
Until now.
Sounds incredible. And you say it's a solo exhibition. Should it be a duo exhibition?
Sorry.
Should it be a duo exhibition?
the two of you in the exhibition.
Yes. No. Only us.
Yeah. It sounds great. Okay. I don't know whether Mark wants to come back in, because it's.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I think looking at the time, Roula, thank you so much. If you need to pop out for work, that's totally okay.
Thank you so much. Mark, can I take a minute?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you so much, Deidre. Thank you so much, Mark, Gav, Niall. Thank you for everything. I want to know that you helped me so much to know myself, to develop my project. It is the most amazing experience I had in my life. And thank you so much for that. I had to leave. Thanks again. I wish you the best.
It's really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful work, Roula. Really beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Stunning stuff.
So do you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Roula. Bye.
Thanks, Roula.
Guys, I think we'll take potentially just one question from the audience. We're just being conscious of everybody's time. Niall's got to go to bed, especially. So if there are any burning questions from any of the people.
That's the kind of phrase you hear at the end of every seminar.
Yeah. Niall's got to go to sleep, so.
Yeah.
Can I go first?
Yeah. If there are no questions, I just had a quick one that maybe you guys could expand on. Is there anyone interested in asking something there? No, that's okay. I we discussed this last night, and I thought we had an artist talk here in Belfast Exposed, and we had a really interesting conversation about this. And like I said, I'm conscious of time, so we won't dive too much into it. But I felt like making this my work in this show, I had sort of some real dissonance about being a photographer. While I was making it, I realized, and actually I had interviewed, I had done an interview for for Matthew Finn for the dissertation, and he was saying he feels like photography is very selfish. And I started to feel that way too towards the end of this, where I realized that I was doing this project for me, and other people, like if they wanted a picture of themselves, they got that. But if they didn't, which most of the time they didn't, then it was just really, an exploration for myself. And I found sort of a tension in thinking about the benefit and who it was for, and the medium itself being selfish like that. And I wondered if you guys would just maybe touch on that, how your projects felt for you to make, if it was more personal or if the motivation was external, or that sort of.
Yeah, I think for me, whenever I began the project, I was purely looking at it as something that was outside of myself almost. I was just a body in the world that was looking around and making images about things that I saw. And it wasn't really until, as the course developed and as I developed, and I started to realize that, the importance of authorship, it was all about, the images that I chose to make were influenced by everything about me, my height, my personality, my background, my history, my family, my friends, where I was located, etc. And I think that it is very personal. And I think probably my project, I mean, if I look at Mark's or Gav's, I mean, those projects are very clearly about you, and that's kind of in your artist statement. But then what I think is valuable and important about those kind of projects is that it might be about you, but it's also about the human experience. It's the shared human experience. And somebody might look at your work and say, you know what, I identify with that. And what you've done is you've made an image of your friend, and I feel the emotion that you put into it. The idea that you've got this loss that's constantly happened with every time you move with your friends, and somebody else has experienced the same thing. I mean, that resonated with me because I'm living somewhere that people come here, they do a year contract, and then they leave. And it's got to the point where after the first year, I was very sad when it happened, but now I've become almost, I wouldn't say emotionless, but it's definitely, I think, well, it's happened so many times. Literally hundreds of people have left in the time I've been here that I've known intimate, like, closely, not intimately. Got a fiance, but that resonates with me. And looking at Gav's work as well, it's about him, but some of the images that he was showing with the car headlights, looking at I guess it's him kneeling down in front of it. I mean, that means something to me because that's something that, like, I've seen in Northern Ireland. Talking about the Cave Hill, I didn't grow up in Belfast, but I'm very familiar with the Cave Hill. I know lots of people. I've been there many times. So it is personal, but it's universal, and I think our projects are, like, you look at my project and you think, well, there's nothing about a Northern Irish person in this, but there is. You can't see it, but it's there. Whereas with yours, you can see yourself, but everything's behind it. That's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, I agree. And I can definitely see a lot of, I mean, I think it's when you look at something that you're conditioned to pick up certain things, you're conditioned to see certain signs and certain messages. And that from growing up in Northern Ireland, it's those are far too familiar to ignore in your work as well. But for me, I think it was, I think when you have a difficulty in explaining things in a literal sense, and somebody said that, I've got a quote written down here, and it's, photography is not literal, but rather it's an effect that we believe in. And I mean, that to me was, it was like an offer of a language that, you know, that I could communicate in, that people would listen to, and they would, you know, they would, as long as the message was concise enough, or it was clear enough, then it was a way of communicating on a, you know, on a personal level, but also on a wider level, as Niall said. But it's also something that that through research has sort of noticed that that people sort of accept photography less as an art form than other mediums, maybe. So, you know, like if you think of sculpture, or if you think of you know, cinema or painting, they look at those and they see that that sort of artistic integrity is in those. But when it comes to photography, I think you've got I suppose it's a double-edged sword. You've got that sort of ability to communicate in a much more realistic way, but you've also got that that opportunity to sort of to speak in a more esoteric, secret language, that if you don't want to necessarily say something explicitly, and it's certainly with how my work ended up, it's not an explicit sort of you know, historical account, but it's the message is there. So if you're empathetic towards it, if you're sensitive to it, then it's that language is there, and that was what made photography really you know, perfect for somebody who's a bit of a loner. You know, like I'm a bit of a loner. I like to spend time. I got used to spending time by myself, so photography became that thing that was like, you know, it's a perfect way to sort of communicate a conversation without having anybody there to talk with. So yeah, I think that's how I view it anyway.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Gav.
Yeah.
And Niall, but that was great, guys. Thank you so
Pleasure.
much. And Ken, a lot of really insightful questions and thoughts. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I think we'll call it there. I will say before we go, everybody, next Thursday we also have 3 more artist talks from this show, and that evening in Belfast Exposed we also have another artist talk, Dar McGraw, who is launching a book here. So I'd invite you all to that, but thank you all very much for being here.
Thanks, Mark.
And
thanks
to you
again.
Mark. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks,
Gav.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
See you all soon.
Brilliant.
Take care, everyone. Good night.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.